3 years. That's how long it took to save up for that car. Every overtime shift, every skipped vacation, every time he chose to pack lunch instead of ordering takeout. It all came down to this moment, pulling into the driveway of his townhouse, with that brand new Tesla humming quietly beneath him. The midnight blue paint caught the afternoon sun just right, and he couldn't help but sit there for a minute just taking it all in. His neighbor from 2 doors down was the first to notice. The guy practically jogged over with his phone out, already snapping pictures. Within 15 minutes, it felt like half the block had come out to see it. People were congratulating him, asking about the features, wanting to sit inside and check out the fancy screen. One of the older residents even admitted he'd been thinking about going electric himself. It felt good, you know? Like all that hard work had finally paid off in a way everyone could see. That's when she showed up. He'd seen her around the neighborhood before, always carrying that clipboard, always seeming to inspect something. She had this way of walking that made it look like she was on a mission, back straight, eyes scanning everything like a hawk looking for mice. Her name was Patricia Hoffman, though everyone just called her Mrs. Hoffman. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a position she'd held for going on 7 years now. Mrs. Hoffman didn't come over to congratulate him. She didn't ask about the car or comment on the color. She just walked right up, clipboard already in hand, and started talking. "I need to inform you that this vehicle is in violation of our community guidelines," she said, not even bothering with a hello first. He blinked, genuinely confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "The color," she continued, tapping her pen against the clipboard. "Our HOA clearly states that all vehicles visible from the street must be in earth tones. Beige, tan, brown, gray. Your vehicle is blue. That's a violation." For a second, he thought maybe she was joking. He even laughed a little, looking around to see if anyone else was hearing this. But Mrs. Hoffman's face didn't change. She was completely serious. "Wait, hold on," he said, pulling out his phone. "I read through the HOA bylaws before I bought this place. I don't remember anything about car colors." He'd actually been pretty careful about the rules. The neighborhood had seemed nice when he was house hunting, but he'd heard enough HOA horror stories to do his homework. He'd downloaded the entire community guidelines document and read through it twice. There were rules about lawn maintenance, rules about holiday decorations, rules about where you could put your trash cans, but car colors? He would have remembered that. Mrs. Hoffman watched him scroll through his phone with this tight little smile on her face. "Perhaps you missed that section," she said. "Here," he said, finding the document and pulling up the search function. "Let me just look for it real quick." He typed in vehicle and scanned through the results. Rules about commercial vehicles, yes. Rules about boats and RVs, definitely. Rules about parking on the grass, of course, but nothing about colors. He showed her his phone. "I'm not seeing anything about vehicle colors in here." Mrs. Hoffman's smile got even tighter. "I've been managing this community for 7 years. I think I know the guidelines." "I'm sure you do," he said, trying to keep his voice friendly. "But could you show me where exactly it says that? Because I've got the bylaws right here and I'm just not seeing it." That's when her face started to change. The fake smile disappeared completely, replaced by something harder. Her eyes went cold, and she pulled her clipboard against her chest like a shield. "Are you questioning my authority?" she asked. "No, I'm just asking to see the rule," he said. "If I'm violating something, I want to know where it's written down." Several of the neighbors who'd been admiring the car were still hanging around, and he could feel them watching this whole exchange. Nobody was saying anything, but the energy had definitely shifted. A few people were starting to look uncomfortable. Mrs. Hoffman straightened up even more, if that was possible. "I don't appreciate your tone. This is exactly the kind of attitude that creates problems in a community. Rules exist for a reason, and everyone needs to follow them, no exceptions." "I agree completely," he said. "I just want to see the actual rule." "I'll be bringing this up at the next board meeting," she said, completely ignoring his request. "And I'll be watching your property very closely from now on. Very closely. I suggest you familiarize yourself with all of our guidelines, not just the ones you feel like following." Then she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, in his driveway, totally confused about what had just happened. His neighbor, the one who'd come over first, walked up and put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't worry too much about it, man. She's like that with everyone at first. Just park your car and enjoy it." But another neighbor, an older woman who'd lived there for over a decade, had a different take. "You might want to be careful," she said quietly. "Mrs. Hoffman doesn't like to be questioned. I've seen her make life difficult for people who get on her bad side." He thanked them both and headed inside, but the joy of the new car had definitely been dampened. He spent the rest of the evening going through the HOA documents again, this time with a fine-tooth comb. Nothing. There was absolutely nothing about vehicle colors. He even called a friend who was a real estate agent and asked her to look through it. She confirmed what he already knew. There was no such rule. That night, lying in bed, he kept thinking about the encounter. Something about it bothered him beyond just the false accusation. It was the way Mrs. Hoffman had acted, like she was personally offended that he'd asked for proof. Like questioning her was somehow disrespectful, even when she was clearly wrong. He thought about what his neighbor had said, about being careful. Part of him wanted to just let it go. Life was too short to fight with the HOA president over something that probably wouldn't amount to anything anyway. Maybe she'd forget about it by the next board meeting. Maybe this was just her way of asserting dominance with new people, and once she realized he wasn't going to cause trouble, she'd back off. But another part of him, the part that had worked 3 jobs to save up for that car, the part that had spent hours researching the community rules to make sure he was doing everything right, that part was angry. He hadn't done anything wrong. His car was beautiful and it was his, and he'd parked it in his own assigned spot. What right did anyone have to tell him it was a violation when it clearly wasn't? He fell asleep that night still thinking about it, not knowing that this was just the beginning. Not knowing that Mrs. Hoffman's warning about watching him closely wasn't just an empty threat, and definitely not knowing that in 3 days he'd wake up to find his brand new car turned into a canvas for her petty revenge. If he'd known what was coming, maybe he would have handled things differently that first day. Maybe he would have just nodded and smiled and let her believe she'd won. But hindsight is 20/20, and at that moment, all he knew was that he'd finally achieved something he'd worked incredibly hard for, and someone was trying to take away his joy for no good reason. The midnight blue Tesla sat in his driveway that night, gleaming under the streetlights, perfect and untouched. It wouldn't stay that way for long. The morning started normal enough. He'd set his alarm for 6:30 like always, hit snooze once, then dragged himself out of bed. Coffee first, then shower, then the usual routine of getting ready for work. He grabbed his keys and wallet, threw on his jacket, and headed out the door. That's when he saw it. At first, his brain couldn't quite process what he was looking at. His car looked like it had been attacked by a swarm of yellow butterflies. Every single inch of it, from the hood to the trunk, from the doors to the windows, was covered in sticky notes. Not just a few as a prank, hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They overlapped each other, creating this bizarre patchwork that completely obscured the midnight blue paint underneath. He walked closer, his mouth literally hanging open. Each sticky note had the same thing printed on it in bold black letters. Violation, non-compliant vehicle color. His hands were shaking as he reached out to pull one off. The adhesive felt weird, kind of crusty. These hadn't been put on recently. They'd been here for a while, probably hours, baking in the early morning sun. When he peeled the first note off, it left a sticky residue behind. He pulled off another one. Same thing. The adhesive was bonding with his paint. "Oh no," he whispered. "No, no, no." He started pulling them off faster, panic rising in his chest. Every single one left that sticky residue. His beautiful new car, the one he'd saved 3 years for, was being damaged right in front of his eyes with every note he removed. His neighbor from across the street, the one who'd warned him to be careful, came out in her bathrobe. "Oh my God," she said. "Who would do this?" He already knew who. The notes gave it away, but he needed proof. "My doorbell camera," he said suddenly, running back to his front door. His hands fumbled with his phone as he pulled up the app. The camera faced the driveway. It had to have caught something. He scrolled back through the footage, going back hour by hour. There. 6 in the morning, just as the sun was starting to come up. Two figures approached his car carrying shopping bags. They pulled out stacks and stacks of sticky notes and started covering his car, working methodically from front to back. The video quality wasn't perfect in the early morning light, but it was good enough. He could clearly see Mrs. Hoffman's face. And the woman with her. That was Carol something, another one of the HOA board members. They'd spent almost 20 minutes covering his car, chatting and laughing the whole time like they were decorating for a party. He downloaded the video immediately and made 3 backup copies. Then he called the police. The officer who showed up was sympathetic but not exactly encouraging. "This is technically vandalism," he said, looking at the car and the video footage. "You've got them on camera, which is good. I'll file a report, and you can pursue this through the courts if you want. But I gotta be honest with you. For something like this, it's probably going to be more hassle than it's worth." "What about the damage?" he asked, gesturing at the sticky residue covering his car. "Document everything. Take lots of pictures. Get an estimate for repairs. That'll help if you decide to take them to small claims court." After the officer left, he spent an hour carefully photographing his car from every angle. Then he tried to clean it himself with soap and water. That didn't work. The residue just smeared around. He tried glass cleaner. That didn't work either. Finally, he looked up professional detailers in the area and found one that could see him that afternoon. Work was out of the question. He called in and explained the situation to his boss, who was understanding but clearly thought the whole thing was bizarre. Then he drove his sticky, residue-covered car to the detailing shop, feeling humiliated every time someone stared at him at a stoplight. The detailer was a guy in his 50s who'd seen everything. He walked around the car, whistling low. "Sticky notes, huh? How long were they on here?" "At least a few hours. Maybe more." "Yeah, that's your problem right there. The adhesive baked on in the sun. We're going to need to do a full clay bar treatment. Probably a polish, too. This isn't going to be cheap." "Just fix it," he said. "Whatever it takes, $400. That's what it cost to remove every trace of Mrs. Hoffman's little message. $400 to fix damage she'd caused because he dared to ask her to show him a rule that didn't exist. While he waited for his car, he called the HOA management office. He explained what happened, mentioned that he had video evidence, and asked what the next steps were. The woman on the phone sounded bored. "You'll need to file a formal complaint with the board," she said. "They meet once a month. The next meeting is in 2 weeks. Can I send you the video evidence now? You can bring it to the meeting. But I have clear footage of board members vandalizing my property." "Sir, you'll need to follow the proper procedures. Bring your complaint to the next board meeting." He hung up, frustration building in his chest. Something about this felt wrong. The way the management office seemed so unbothered, like they dealt with this kind of thing all the time. 2 weeks later, he showed up at the HOA board meeting with his video evidence queued up on his laptop. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small room with folding chairs and flickering fluorescent lights. There were 5 board members sitting at a table at the front. Mrs. Hoffman sat right in the middle, with Carol, the woman from the video, sitting 2 seats down from her. He waited through 45 minutes of mind-numbing discussion about landscaping bids and pool maintenance schedules. Finally, they got to new business. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," he said, standing up, "about vandalism to my vehicle." Mrs. Hoffman looked at him like she'd never seen him before. "Please state your name and address for the record." He did, then continued. 3 weeks ago, my car was covered in hundreds of sticky notes that caused damage to the paint. I have security camera footage showing who did it." He opened his laptop and turned it so the board could see. Mrs. Hoffman leaned forward, watching the video. Her expression never changed. When it finished, she sat back and folded her hands on the table. "I don't see how this concerns the HOA," she said calmly. He blinked. "That's you in the video. And Carol. Both of you are on the board." "I don't see any clear identification in that footage," Mrs. Hoffman said. "The lighting is poor. It could be anyone. Are you serious right now?" The words came out before he could stop them. "You can clearly see both of your faces." "I'm going to ask you to watch your tone," Mrs. Hoffman said. "This is a formal meeting and we expect residents to conduct themselves respectfully." "I have proof that board members vandalized my car," he said, trying to keep his voice level. "It cost me $400 to fix the damage. I want reimbursement and I want an apology." The board members looked at each other. One of them, an older man he'd never seen before, cleared his throat. "Did you file a police report?" "Yes." "And what did the police say?" "They said it was vandalism and filed a report." "Did they make any arrests?" "No, but..." "Then there's no proof that a crime occurred," the man said. "Just a video that may or may not show what you claim it shows. Without a criminal conviction, the HOA can't take action against board members based on accusations." He stood there, speechless. This was insane. He had video evidence. He had a police report. He had receipts for the repair costs. And they were just dismissing it all like it was nothing. "Is there anything else?" Mrs. Hoffman asked, her voice dripping with fake politeness. "This is unbelievable," he said. "If you continue with this disrespectful attitude, I'll have to ask you to leave the meeting," Mrs. Hoffman said. "We have other business to attend to." He left before they could kick him out, his laptop clutched in one hand, his whole body shaking with anger. In the parking lot, his neighbor, the older woman, caught up with him. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have warned you. The whole board is made up of her friends. They protect each other. How is that legal?" he asked. She shrugged sadly. "It's not about legal. It's about who has the power, and right now she does." He sat in his car for a long time after that, just staring at the steering wheel. $400 out of pocket. No apology. No consequences for Mrs. Hoffman. And the clear message that if he kept pushing, they'd find other ways to make his life difficult. That's when something shifted inside him. He'd been trying to do things the right way, following the proper channels, believing that evidence and truth would matter. But Mrs. Hoffman had shown him that the system was rigged. She'd stacked the board with her friends and they'd cover for each other no matter what. Fine. If the official channels wouldn't work, he'd find another way. He started his car and drove home, his mind already working on a plan. Mrs. Hoffman had made a mistake. She'd assumed he would just give up, just accept the loss and move on like probably dozens of other residents had before him. She was wrong. The next morning, he started doing his homework. Real homework this time. Not just reading through the basic HOA guidelines. If Mrs. Hoffman wanted to play games, he needed to understand the rules better than she did. First step was understanding his rights as a homeowner. He spent hours online, reading through state laws about homeowners associations. Turns out HOAs had to follow a lot more rules than most people realized. They couldn't just do whatever they wanted. There were regulations about transparency, about financial reporting, about how meetings had to be conducted. One thing jumped out at him immediately. By state law, any homeowner could request copies of the HOA's financial records. All of them, bank statements, invoices, contracts, everything, and the HOA had to provide them within 30 days. He drafted a formal request letter that night, citing the specific state statute. He asked for 3 years' worth of financial records, meeting minutes, vendor contracts, and budget reports. Then he sent it certified mail, with return receipt requested so there'd be proof they received it. While he waited for the documents, he started paying attention to the neighborhood in a way he never had before. Every morning, he'd take a walk around the community before work. He started noticing things. Small things. Mrs. Hoffman's property, for instance, she had a shed in her backyard. He could see it from the street when he walked past. It was a nice shed, probably 8 by 10 feet with a little window and everything, but according to the HOA guidelines he'd read so carefully, any structure over 6 by 8 feet required architectural approval from the board. He pulled up the meeting minutes going back 2 years. No approval for Mrs. Hoffman's shed. Then there was her fence. The guidelines said fences couldn't exceed 6 feet in height. He brought a tape measure on his next walk. Her fence was 6.5 feet tall. He started keeping notes on his phone. Every violation he spotted, he documented with photos and timestamps. Mrs. Hoffman wasn't the only one breaking rules either. Carol, her friend from the board, had painted her front door a bright red. The guidelines specifically said front doors had to be earth tones or white. Red definitely wasn't on that list. 3 weeks after he sent his request, a large envelope arrived. The HOA's financial records. He cleared off his dining room table and spread everything out, then spent an entire Saturday going through it all. At first, it just looked like normal stuff. Monthly statements, utility bills for the common areas, payment to the management company. But then he started noticing patterns. There was a landscaping company that got paid every month, $5,000 like clockwork. That seemed high for a small community like theirs. He looked up the company name online. The website was bare bones. Just a phone number and an email address. No portfolio of work, no reviews, nothing. He dug deeper, looking up the business registration with the state. The owner's name was Richard Hoffman. He sat back in his chair. Hoffman. That couldn't be a coincidence. He pulled out his laptop and started searching. Richard Hoffman, age 56, married to Patricia Hoffman, Mrs. Hoffman's husband. The HOA was paying her husband's company $5,000 a month for landscaping. He called 3 other landscaping companies and asked for quotes on maintaining a community their size. The highest quote he got was $1,800 a month. Mrs. Hoffman was funneling HOA money to her husband's company, and they were charging nearly triple the market rate. He kept digging. There was another line item that appeared quarterly: consulting fees, Community Advisory Services, LLC. $2,000 4 times a year. He looked up that company too. Registered to a Catherine Morrison. That name sounded familiar. He pulled up the HOA meeting minutes and searched for it. There. Catherine Morrison had been approved as a community consultant 3 years ago, right after Mrs. Hoffman became board president. The vote had been 3-2, with Mrs. Hoffman and her allies voting yes. He searched for Catherine Morrison on social media. Found her on the 3rd try. Her profile picture showed her at someone's graduation. The caption read, "So proud of my daughter." He clicked through to see who she'd tagged. Patricia Hoffman's daughter. Mrs. Hoffman was paying her daughter's LLC $8,000 a year in consulting fees. For what? The meeting minutes never said. There was no contract specifying what services were being provided. Just payments going out quarter after quarter. He sat there looking at the papers spread across his table, and anger burned in his chest. This wasn't just about sticky notes anymore. Mrs. Hoffman wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was stealing from the community. Every homeowner in the neighborhood was paying HOA dues, and she was siphoning that money off to her family. But he needed to be smart about this. He needed more than just his own analysis. He needed an expert opinion. His friend Tyler was a real estate attorney. They'd gone to college together, and Tyler had helped him review the purchase documents when he bought the townhouse. He called him up and explained the situation. "Can you send me everything?" Tyler asked. "I'll take a look." 2 days later, Tyler called him back. "Okay, so this is definitely problematic. The landscaping contract is way above market rate, and there should have been a competitive bidding process. The consulting fees are even worse because there's no clear deliverable. But here's the thing. Proving financial misconduct in an HOA is tricky. You'd need to show that she personally benefited, and technically, payments to her husband's company and her daughter's company are separate entities. But it's obvious what she's doing," he said. "Obvious and provable are 2 different things in court." "However," Tyler paused, "you might not need to go to court. You know what you could do? You could call an emergency homeowner meeting. If you get enough homeowners to sign a petition, the bylaws require the board to hold a special meeting. Then you present all of this to your neighbors. Let them decide what to do about it. How many signatures would I need? Let me check your bylaws. Hold on." He heard papers rustling. "Okay, here it is. You need 25% of homeowners to petition for an emergency meeting. How many homes are in your community? 212. So you'd need 53 signatures. That's doable." After he hung up with Tyler, he made a plan. He couldn't just knock on doors and ask people to sign something. He needed to show them why it mattered. He needed to make this real for them. He spent the next 2 days creating a document. Just the facts laid out clearly. Market rate for landscaping versus what they were paying. The mysterious consulting fees with no clear purpose. Photos of Mrs. Hoffman's own violations of HOA rules. Copies of the meeting minutes showing how she'd dismissed his complaint even with video evidence. At the bottom, he added up the numbers. Over 3 years, Mrs. Hoffman had funneled over $200,000 in excess payments to her family members. $200,000 that could have gone to actually improving the community. New playground equipment. Better security. Repaving the roads. Anything except lining her own pockets. He printed out 200 copies. Then he started going door to door. The first few houses were rough. People didn't want to get involved. They'd heard about his car, sympathized but didn't want to make waves. But then he got to Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman who'd lived in the community for 15 years. She invited him in, read through his document carefully, then looked up at him with fire in her eyes. "I knew something was wrong," she said. "My dues went up 30% 2 years ago and we haven't seen any improvements." She said it was for necessary maintenance, but what maintenance? "Nothing's changed." Mrs. Chen signed his petition. Then she told him about 3 other neighbors who'd had run-ins with Mrs. Hoffman over the years. Arbitrary violations, rude treatment, threats of fines. He visited each of them. They all signed. Word started spreading. By the end of the first week, he had 40 signatures. People were starting to talk, sharing their own stories about Mrs. Hoffman. The guy who'd been fined $300 because his lawn was a 1/4 inch too long, when Mrs. Hoffman's own lawn was shaggy. The woman who'd been denied permission to install solar panels while Mrs. Hoffman's friend Carol got approval for a whole house generator that was louder than a motorcycle. By the end of the second week, he had 78 signatures, way more than the 53 he needed. He submitted the petition to the management company with all the required documentation. By law, they had to schedule an emergency meeting within 30 days. He picked a date 3 weeks out, giving himself time to prepare, but he wasn't done yet. He had one more thing he wanted to do, something that would make his point crystal clear. He'd noticed something about Mrs. Hoffman's white Lexus. It was white, bright, pristine white, and, according to her made-up rule, the one she'd used to justify vandalizing his car, only earth tones were allowed. White wasn't an earth tone. He thought about it for a few days, weighing the risks. This could backfire. It could make him look petty, could undermine the serious financial issues he'd uncovered, but it could also make a point that everyone would understand. Mrs. Hoffman had literally used a fake rule to damage his property. What better way to show the absurdity of that than to apply her own standard to her own car? He went to an office supply store and bought sticky notes, hundreds of them. He printed out the same message she'd used on his car. Violation, non-compliant vehicle color. Then, the morning before the emergency meeting, he got up at 6 a.m. He made sure his doorbell camera was positioned perfectly. He wanted everything on video. He walked over to Mrs. Hoffman's driveway and started covering her car in sticky notes, working methodically, making sure each one was visible. It took him 23 minutes. When he was done, he stepped back and took a picture. Then he went home, downloaded the video from his doorbell camera, and saved it with the timestamp clearly visible. He knew what would happen next. Mrs. Hoffman would call the police. She'd be furious. She'd probably file a complaint. And that was fine. Because unlike her, he'd done this in broad daylight with his own face clearly visible on his own security camera. He wasn't hiding. He was making a statement. He was showing everyone exactly what she'd done to him. And more importantly, he was showing them what kind of person they'd given power to. The phone calls started within an hour. First Mrs. Chen, laughing so hard she could barely speak. Then his next-door neighbor. Then people he'd barely even talked to before. Everyone had seen Mrs. Hoffman's car and everyone knew exactly what it meant. "You actually did it," Mrs. Chen said, her voice full of admiration. "I can't believe you actually did it." He'd expected to feel nervous, maybe a little guilty, but mostly what he felt was satisfaction. Not because he'd gotten revenge exactly, but because he'd held up a mirror. Everything she'd done to him, he'd done right back. The only difference was he'd done it openly, in full view, taking complete responsibility. Around 10 in the morning, a police car pulled up outside his house. He'd been expecting this too. He went outside before the officer could knock. "Morning," the officer said. He was young, probably mid-20s, and he looked like he was trying not to smile. "I got a call about vandalism. Lady down the street says you covered her car in sticky notes." "That's correct," he said. The officer blinked. "You're admitting to it?" "Absolutely. I have video footage from my doorbell camera showing me doing it if you need evidence. Time-stamped and everything." Now the officer definitely smiled. "Mind telling me why?" He explained the whole story. The false HOA violation, his car being vandalized, the dismissive board meeting, the financial irregularities he'd discovered. The officer listened, nodding occasionally. "So this was like a statement?" the officer asked. "Exactly. She used a made-up rule to justify damaging my property. I used her own made-up rule to show how absurd it was. Plus, I wanted to demonstrate the double standard. When she does it anonymously at 6 in the morning, it's apparently fine. When I do it openly in broad daylight, taking full responsibility, suddenly it's a crime." The officer was quiet for a moment. Look, technically this is vandalism. She could press charges if she wants to. But between you and me, given the circumstances, and given that you're being completely upfront about it, I'm going to write this up as a dispute between neighbors. My recommendation is going to be that you both leave each other's cars alone from now on. That sounds fair, he said. Although, the officer added, walking back to his car, I'd probably get those sticky notes off before they bake on in the sun. That stuff's hard to get off once it sits for a while. He watched the police car drive away, then went inside. He'd made his point. Mrs. Hoffman now knew exactly how it felt, and everyone in the neighborhood had seen it happen. The emergency meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. that evening at the community clubhouse. He showed up at 6:30 to set up. He'd borrowed a projector from work and brought his laptop with all his documentation organized into a presentation. Tyler had helped him structure it, keeping it clear and factual, nothing emotional or accusatory. Just the numbers and the evidence. By 6:45, people started arriving. By 10 after 7, the room was packed. Every chair was full, and people were standing along the walls. He did a quick head count. At least 200 people. Nearly the entire community had shown up. Mrs. Hoffman sat in the front row with her board members, her arms crossed, her face like stone. She hadn't said a word to anyone since arriving. The meeting was officially called to order by the management company representative, a tired-looking woman in her 50s who clearly wanted to be anywhere else. She explained the petition, confirmed it had the required signatures, and turned the floor over to him. He stood up and the room went quiet. His hands were shaking a little, but his voice was steady when he spoke. Thank you all for coming. I know this is unusual and I appreciate you taking the time. I'm going to show you what I found when I requested our HOA's financial records. These are public documents that any homeowner can request, but most of us never do. I think after you see this, you'll understand why that needs to change. He started with the landscaping contract, put up a slide showing what they were paying versus market rates. The room started murmuring. Now you might think, okay, maybe we're just overpaying a bit. But here's where it gets interesting. He pulled up the business registration for the landscaping company. The owner of this company is Richard Hoffman, Mrs. Hoffman's husband. The murmuring got louder. Mrs. Hoffman's face went red, but she didn't say anything. He moved on to the consulting fees, showed the payments, the lack of any contract or deliverables, and then the business registration showing it was owned by her daughter. Over 3 years, these two arrangements have cost our community in excess of over $200,000. That's money from our dues, money that could have gone to actual improvements. A man in the back stood up. Is this legal? Can she just do that? It's legally questionable, he said. But more importantly, it's a violation of her fiduciary duty to the community. The HOA board is supposed to act in the best interest of all homeowners, not use their position to enrich themselves and their families. Then he showed the photos of Mrs. Hoffman's own violations. The oversized shed, the too tall fence, the late dues payments she'd erased from the records. This is someone who enforces rules selectively, who uses her position to punish people she doesn't like while ignoring violations by herself and her friends. He could have stopped there. The financial evidence was damning enough. But he pulled up one more video, the footage of his car being vandalized. This is from my doorbell camera 3 weeks ago. That's Mrs. Hoffman and board member Carol covering my car in sticky notes because she claimed my car color violated HOA rules. A rule that doesn't exist. The damage cost me $400 to fix. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, some shouting. Mrs. Hoffman stood up. This is a witch hunt, she yelled. I've served this community for 7 years and this is how I'm treated. Based on the accusations of someone who vandalized my car just this morning? He clicked to the next slide. His doorbell footage of himself covering her car. I did vandalize your car this morning, he said calmly. In broad daylight with my face clearly visible, taking full responsibility. I used your own made-up rule to demonstrate how absurd it was. The difference is, I'm not hiding behind my position or pretending I didn't do it. I'm showing everyone exactly what you did to me. Mrs. Chen stood up. I've lived here 15 years and I've watched you bully people that entire time. My friend got fined because her Christmas lights stayed up 2 days past New Year's. But your house had Valentine's decorations up until March. You pick and choose who follows the rules based on whether you like them or not. Other people started standing up, sharing their stories. The violations that appeared out of nowhere. The fines that seemed arbitrary. The requests that got denied for some people but approved for others. Mrs. Hoffman tried to talk over them, but nobody was listening anymore. Her fellow board members were looking uncomfortable, inching away from her like they didn't want to be associated. The management company representative finally stood up and called for order. Based on what's been presented tonight, I'm recommending an immediate vote of no confidence for the current board. All those in favor? Hands shot up all over the room. It wasn't even close. It was unanimous. The current board is officially dissolved, the representative said. We'll need to hold elections for a new board within 30 days. Mrs. Hoffman was shaking. You can't do this. I'll sue. I'll sue all of you. You're welcome to consult with an attorney, the representative said. But the homeowners have the right to remove board members by majority vote. It's in your bylaws. Tyler, who'd been sitting in the back, stood up. I'd also recommend a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. Given what's been presented tonight, the community needs to know the full extent of any irregularities. And if criminal conduct is found, that should be referred to the appropriate authorities. The representative nodded. We can arrange that. Mrs. Hoffman grabbed her purse and stormed out, Carol and one other board member following her. The remaining 2 board members stayed looking relieved. After the meeting, people crowded around him, shaking his hand, thanking him, apologizing for not standing up sooner. Mrs. Chen hugged him. You did what a lot of us wanted to do but were too scared to try, she said. Thank you. He drove home that night feeling lighter than he had in weeks. The sticky notes were gone from Mrs. Hoffman's car. Someone had removed them, probably her. His own car sat in his driveway, the midnight blue paint gleaming under the streetlights. He'd stood up to a bully, and he'd won. Not through violence or threats, but through transparency and evidence, by showing everyone the truth and letting them decide what to do with it. But he knew this wasn't quite over yet. There would be an audit. There would probably be legal action. Mrs. Hoffman might actually try to sue, though Tyler thought she'd be crazy to do so given what might come out in discovery. And there was still the question of what the audit would find. He'd only scratched the surface of the financial records. Who knew what else might be hiding in there? He went to bed that night not knowing exactly what would happen next, but knowing he'd done the right thing. Sometimes standing up for yourself meant standing up for everyone. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't getting even. It was exposing the truth and letting justice work itself out. Tomorrow would bring new developments. But tonight, for the first time since buying his dream car, he could sleep peacefully. The audit took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of an independent accounting firm going through every transaction, every contract, every invoice the HOA had processed over the past 5 years. The new interim board, elected by emergency vote 2 days after Mrs. Hoffman was removed, cooperated fully. They wanted answers just as much as everyone else did. During those 6 weeks, the neighborhood felt different. People talked to each other more. There were impromptu gatherings in driveways, conversations over fences, a general sense that the community was waking up from a long sleep. Mrs. Chen organized a potluck in the clubhouse, something that hadn't happened in years. Over 100 people showed up. Mrs. Hoffman, for her part, had gone silent. Her car stayed in her garage. Her curtains stayed drawn. The few times anyone saw her, she was getting into a different car, probably her husband's, and leaving quickly without making eye contact. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, the audit results came in. The interim board president, a retired accountant named Mr. Peterson, called an emergency meeting to present the findings. Once again, the clubhouse was packed. Everyone wanted to know what had been discovered. Mr. Peterson stood at the front, a thick binder in his hands. His face was grim. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, he said. What the auditors found is worse than we thought. The room went dead silent. He opened the binder and started reading. The landscaping overpayments weren't just 3 years old. They went back 7 years to when Mrs. Hoffman first became president. The consulting fees to her daughter's campaign had been happening for 5 years. But there was more. Mrs. Hoffman had been approving purchases for community maintenance that never happened. A $15,000 irrigation system that was never installed. $8,000 for tree removal that was never performed. Security cameras that were supposedly upgraded, but were actually the same ones from 10 years ago. The auditors estimated that over $45,000 had been paid out for services never rendered. And in each case, the checks had been written to companies that were either owned by family members or dissolved shortly after receiving payment. In total, Mr. Peterson said, his voice heavy, We estimate that approximately $270,000 was misappropriated over the 7 years Mrs. Hoffman served as board president. People gasped. Someone in the back swore loudly. The auditors have recommended we report this to law enforcement, Mr. Peterson continued. This goes beyond simple mismanagement. This is fraud. A woman in the front row raised her hand. What happens to our dues? Do we get that money back? The HOA can pursue civil action against Mrs. Hoffman and the companies that received payments, Mr. Peterson said. But I'll be honest, recovery is unlikely to be full. Some of those companies don't exist anymore. Some of the money is probably already spent. Our attorney estimates we might recover 30 to 40% if we're lucky. Another hand went up. So we're just out all that money? Unless Mrs. Hoffman agrees to a settlement, yes. We're looking at years of legal action that will cost more legal fees on top of what we've already lost. That's when Tyler stood up. He'd been sitting in the back again, taking notes. There might be another option, he said. If Mrs. Hoffman were to agree to repay the misappropriated funds voluntarily, the HOA could choose not to pursue criminal charges. That's not unprecedented in cases like this. It's called restitution. Why would she agree to that? Someone asked. Because criminal fraud charges could mean prison time, Tyler said bluntly, and they'd destroy any assets she has through legal fees. If she's smart, she'll want to settle this quietly. Mr. Peterson nodded. Our attorney suggested the same thing. We're prepared to make her an offer. Full restitution over 5 years, plus she resigns from the HOA and agrees never to serve on the board again. In exchange, we don't file criminal charges. She should go to jail, someone shouted. Several people nodded in agreement. Maybe, Mr. Peterson said, but we need to think about what's best for the community. A criminal trial could take years. Legal fees would drain our reserves, and there's no guarantee we'd see any money back. This way, we get at least some restitution and we can start to move forward. The vote was closer than the one that had removed Mrs. Hoffman from the board, but it passed. The community would offer her the settlement. If she refused, they'd file criminal charges and pursue civil action. 3 days later, Mrs. Hoffman's attorney contacted the HOA's attorney. She would accept the settlement. The agreement was finalized within a week. Mrs. Hoffman would repay $270,000 over 5 years, at $54,000 per year. Her husband's landscaping company would have its contract terminated immediately. She would resign from the HOA, surrender her voting rights on community matters, and agree to never seek a position on the board again. In exchange, the HOA would not pursue criminal charges, though the agreement specified that individual homeowners could still file police reports if they chose. Nobody did. Most people just wanted it to be over. The day the settlement was signed, he happened to be outside washing his car. The midnight blue Tesla still looked perfect, no trace of the sticky note incident remaining. He saw Mrs. Hoffman come out to her mailbox the first time he'd seen her in weeks. She saw him too. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the street. He thought about saying something, thought about rubbing it in, about telling her she got what she deserved. But looking at her, he just felt tired. She looked smaller somehow, defeated. Her carefully maintained appearance was gone. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wasn't wearing makeup. She looked like someone who'd been broken. He nodded once, a simple acknowledgement. She didn't nod back, just turned and went inside. He finished washing his car and went inside himself. That night, Mrs. Chen called him. Did you hear? She asked. The Hoffmans are selling their house, moving out of state. Can't say I'm surprised, he said. Good riddance, I say. Though I'll miss having the most exciting neighbor drama we've had in decades. He laughed. The whole thing did seem almost absurd in retrospect. It had started with sticky notes and ended with a forensic audit and a $250,000 settlement. You know what the funny thing is, Mrs. Chen said. All of this could have been avoided if she'd just been nice to you about your car. If she'd just left you alone, none of this would have come out. She could have kept stealing from us for who knows how many more years. I guess that's usually how it works, he said. Bullies keep getting away with it until they pick on the wrong person. Or the right person, depending on how you look at it, Mrs. Chen said. We needed someone like you, someone who wasn't scared of her. After they hung up, he sat on his couch thinking about that. He hadn't set out to be a hero. He'd just been angry about his car getting vandalized. But in defending himself, he'd ended up defending everyone. The new board turned out to be competent and transparent. They reopened bidding for the landscaping contract and saved the community $2,000 a month. They established new financial controls requiring multiple board members to approve any payment over $500. They created a community newsletter with monthly financial reports, something that had never existed before. The playground got new equipment. The pool got repaired. The roads got repaved. All the things that should have been done years ago but couldn't be, because the money had been going into the Hoffman family's pockets. 6 months after the settlement, the Hoffmans moved out. A young couple with 2 kids moved in. He helped them carry boxes on moving day, just being neighborly. They told him they'd heard about the HOA drama, that everyone they'd talked to during the buying process had mentioned it. "We almost didn't buy here because of it," the husband said, but then everyone said how much better things were now, how the new board actually listens to people. "It's a good community," he said, "just had some growing pains." A year after the whole thing started, on the anniversary of the day he'd bought his Tesla, Mrs. Chen organized a community barbecue. She'd been elected to the new board and had become something of a community organizer, always putting together events and getting people involved. "Speech," someone called out when they saw him arrive. "No speech," he said, laughing. "I'm just here for the burgers." But Mrs. Chen pulled him aside later, away from the crowd. "You changed this place," she said. "You know that, right? This community was dying before. People kept to themselves, nobody trusted anyone. Everyone was just waiting out their time until they could sell and leave. Now look at us." She gestured at the crowd, at neighbors laughing and kids playing and people who actually seemed happy to live here. "You did that." "I just exposed what was already wrong," he said. "You did more than that. You showed people that they could stand up for themselves, that they didn't have to just accept things. That's bigger than the money, bigger than Mrs. Hoffman. You gave people their power back." He drove home that night, past his old parking spot where all this had started. His Tesla was parked there now, exactly where it had been that first day. But everything else was different. Sometimes he still thought about that morning, seeing his car covered in sticky notes, the anger he'd felt, the helplessness when the board dismissed his complaint. Part of him wished it had never happened, but a bigger part of him knew that it needed to happen. Mrs. Hoffman would have kept stealing. The community would have kept suffering. Sometimes it takes something small and petty to reveal something much bigger. He'd learned something through all of this. The system didn't protect you automatically. Rules didn't enforce themselves. Justice didn't just happen. You had to fight for it. You had to be willing to stand up even when it was uncomfortable, even when it would be easier to just let it go. And sometimes the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was just truth. Truth and transparency and people working together for something better than what they had. His Tesla sat in his driveway, the midnight blue paint gleaming under the streetlights. No sticky notes, no violations. Just a car he'd worked hard for, parked outside a house in a community that was finally working the way it was supposed to. He went inside, made himself dinner, and settled in for the evening. Tomorrow was just another day. No drama, no confrontations, no emergency meetings. Just a normal day in a normal neighborhood. And that was exactly how it should be.